So welcome everyone to the 18th session of our Thought Leadership Series. My name is Jason White. I'm the founder, president, and CEO of the National Reentry Workforce Collaborative. If you are joining us for the first time, thank you so much for joining. If you're coming back, thanks for coming in back. Our Thought Leadership Series, as you know, is our way of facilitating continuous learning in the field, where each quarter we get together on one national platform to really consider some of the leading practices, strategies, and approaches and policies that are really making an impact in the field. And today, really excited about your topic. Our topic is the future of work and the justice impacted job seeker. And it is no secret that the US labor market is at a turning point. For example, employers continue to experience persistent workforce shortages. And when you think about that and think about some of the long-term trends like including declining birth rate and also the aging population, when you couple that along with the rapid integration of AI and automation in the workplace, we have seen that the workforce is being reshaped. And the question really is, what are these shifts? What type of impact is it having on the reentry workforce? And today I'm really excited to have Jeffrey Korzenik with us. Jeffrey is actually a friend of mine and a thought leader in the space. He's an economist at Fifth Third Bank and also the author of Untapped Talent. And I must say, I read this book, and it is the book, I would say, that makes the best business case for fair chance hiring. So I'm really excited for us to get started. And Jeffrey, thank you so much for joining. And I want to start with an introduction from you, but the approach that I'd love for you to take, Jeffrey, is I want to hear a little bit about the backstory, right? When you think about the justice impacted workforce, like why did you decide to come down this road, and why do you believe this is a fundamental economic story?
Well, I've got to go back a ways, more than a decade, and I've been in the financial services world for almost 40 years, and uh, you're always learning something new. But around 2013, there was a big question for economists of why we're missing so many people from the labor force. And economists generally, shrug their shoulders, and we just put a new number into our models. But it kept bugging me, and so I would talk. I'd go around the country. I talked to business owners, business leaders, and I kept asking questions. And it became apparent to me that the opioid epidemic was taking a real toll on our workforce. And once you see how a social ill can be a macroeconomic issue, you can't unsee that. So I started working backwards, and I realized that the first problem we had as an economy was long-term unemployment. This was coming out of 08, 09, where you had a terrible recession, and you had also gutted American industry through losses of trade and obsolescence. And so long-term unemployment tends to create people dropping out of the workforce. Long-term unemployment leads to despair. Despair leads to opioids and self-medication. And the combination of lack of employment and opioid abuse is a fast track to having a criminal record. And by about 2014, I'd figured out just how large the problem was. Very fortunately, in 2015, I started at first, frankly, by accident or serendipity or other interventions from above. I started meeting businesses that had focused intentionally on hiring people with criminal records and realized that there was a untapped talent pool there. And I started reaching out to those businesses and realizing there was a model for how to do it. And the model that works anyway, which is something I've talked about extensively to business audiences, is having the right process for figuring out who out of the vast population of people with criminal records is ready to turn their life around, and then critically finding out ways to give them the support so they thrive. And when you do that, you get not an ordinary employee, but you get an exceptional employee. So the combination of a model that works and a vast pool of talent that's underutilized To me, just on the numbers, became the single best solution to our structural labor shortage. A structural labor shortage having to do, per your opening remarks, with not having enough babies 20 and 30 years ago, baby boomers retiring, but they're still consumers. Who's left to provide for the needs of the whole consumer population? And my conclusion came to be there's no single solution, but the solution of looking to people who have been sidelined because of a mistake they made in the past is the single best solution.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. I remember when I just came across your book, even before I met you, which is what kind of convinced me that I needed to connect with you. And I had a friend who made a connection to you. And I picked up your book and I started reading it. I could not put it down because what was encouraging for me is to hear an economist actually speaking from the standpoint of when you think about economic trends, it's very clear that this population is a solution for the gap that we're experiencing in labor force. So thank you for sharing your
Yeah,
story there.
I always say my superpower in this space is not that many people on this call know more about this on a, on a day-to-day basis than I do and have more experience, but I'm able to come at this objectively in a way
Yes.
that the business community can appreciate. And no one in my family has been justice impacted. I think I was primed for this at an early age. My dad was a big influence in my life. He passed away in 2003. But he was first in family to go to college, raised in dire poverty, son of immigrants, and he became a lawyer. And he did it by getting enlisting in World War II at
Mhm.
age 17, got the GI Bill, doubled up on undergrad and law school to get both degrees from Harvard, summa cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, no pressure on me, right? And he would go visit his old neighborhood. He never lost touch with his roots, and we were talking, and I'd go with him as a kid, and he'd meet people he knew, and we talked to a friend of his who ran a junk shop, and I was 8 or 10 at the time. And as we walked away, my dad said, my friend was in prison, and
Mhm.
I said, for what? And he said, murder, a crime of passion. And then my dad said something that, here half a century later still resonates with me. He said, he's done his time. And
Mhm.
so, although I approach this with the tools of an economist, I've never forgotten that there is a moral and ethical necessity for giving people opportunity once they've done their time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On that note, we don't want to pick your economic brain even throughout the course of today, but we do know that there's a personal connection there as well. But before we go into a few questions that I have prepared for you, Jeffrey, I do want to let the audience know that if you do have a question, please do put it in the Q&A pod. We're going to save a little bit of time at the end for you to uh, respond to your questions. We're going to do our best to get through as many as possible. Again, in the Q&A pod, that's where you want to put your questions. So Jeffrey, let me go ahead and ask you this question. So how is the composition of the US workforce changing now? And how is it reshaping the labor force currently?
So I'm going to ask. I wouldn't be a real economist if I didn't come with a whole stack of charts. I've tried to limit it. So I'm going to ask Kimberly to bring those up. And let's start right with the next chart, Kimberly, if we could, please. Um, th- th- it's critical to understand how much immigration policy shaped our labor force. And this is a politically charged area. I think I mentioned that my father's parents are immigrants. My mother's a war refugee. So this has nothing to do about whether we think old or new policies are good or bad, just everything to do with how much this has impacted the labor force and why we have to understand this issue. This is data you see from the Census Bureau. These are net additions or subtractions from the US labor force, the workforce, based on whether the workers are native born, blue, or foreign born, green. And what you'll see in the period from 2021, looking on the bottom, so the right hand side of this chart, 2021 through 24 was a pretty exceptional period where foreign born workers were actually the majority of additions to the workforce. To some degree, this is was going to happen inevitably because US birth rates have fallen, that was catching up with us. We've become more reliant on foreign workers. The issue is the actual numbers and trying to square those with immigration policy. When you look at the number of foreign born workers just in that 4 year period, 21 through 24, they represented an additional 4.6 million workers. Nothing inherently good or bad about this until you start overlaying that with immigration realities. And the reality is that of that 4.6 million who were added to the rolls, probably no more than a million or maybe generously 1.5 million could have come through traditional immigration, the lottery system, the multi-year wait. So where did the other, 3 million plus workers come from? Well, some are refugees, of course. Some are, go back to that slide. Some are, thank you. Some are asylum seekers, but even the asylum seekers are kind of problematic because many asylum seekers came over during a period where, this is a little bit of an oversimplification, but if you came over the border, you said you were seeking asylum, you were allowed in and ultimately able to join the workforce, pending adjudication of your asylum status. Here's the problem. In our belief, most of the people who are claiming asylum status who came over in this period probably won't qualify under the law. And as we work through that 4 year backlog of adjudication wait, and that'll be speeded up because of new hiring of administrative judges, we think a lot of the asylum seekers will not qualify for asylum status, will lose their legal ability to work, and will be forced to leave the country. And then, of course, you have unauthorized workers as well. So all of this is to say that we've built our workforce in recent years on a very shaky foundation. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see just how dramatically this has changed. This is number of border encounters at the southwest land border. It's data from the from the Customs and Border Patrol. And you can see there was a surge of encounters, a surge of people coming over the border from 21 through 24. These are just the ones we know about who came over the border. There's doubtless many more than this, but this is kind of a representative. And what you'll see is that the border is effectively closed, right? Down on the far right, border encounters are very, very low, lowest they've been in decades, because the border is shut. That message has been delivered. I'd also like to point out, and I think it's important to recognize, that this change started not with the inauguration, but with the presidential campaign in 2024. Which is a reflection of the fact that we have to, there's a much greater bipartisan consensus, or at least a broader consensus, that the border should be closed, and the days of supplementing our labor force with mass waves of foreign-born workers are simply over. That is probably the biggest structural change I can think of in the labor force. I have to beg the audience's forgiveness and yours as well, Jason. This first question, I have more slides because this is all so foundational. Well, I'm not going to belabor the slides as we get further into our conversation, but we have to understand just how big the shifts have been. Migration is shift number one. Next slide. And the shift number two is this is the US hiring rate. Well, how much hiring is going on relative to the size of the workforce? And this is also something that's pretty new. What you'll see on the far right-hand side is that hiring is the lowest levels it's been since the awful 08-09 recession and its immediate aftermath. Businesses just aren't hiring much. This is a real issue. It's a real concern in the economy. We think some of this is short-lived. But some of this also probably reflects a recent reality in the business, in the workforce, called labor hoarding. If you shift to the next slide, I want to kind of walk everyone through what's been going on in the labor market with regard to job openings versus job seekers. And again, I realize not everyone's a graph person. We'll get through this together. The dark blue line is the number of job seekers in the United States. So I'm going to draw your attention to the left-hand side here. We had a tremendous number of job seekers, blue line, relative to the green line, which was the number of job openings. That's a labor surplus. And employers like that because they get to exclude randomly, quite frankly, but they get to pick and choose among numerous applicants. Um, they don't have to pay up much. They don't have to think about investing in the workforce because there's always another worker available. That is not a good environment for workers, and it's a particularly bad environment for the justice impacted population because when you have so many job applicants relative to job openings, you tend to use random filters to just winnow down the number of applicants. So, for instance, a common one back then was, I don't want to see any resumes. I'm an employer. I don't want to see any resumes with a gap of 6 months or more. Well, you excluded anyone who's been incarcerated. You excluded anyone who stepped out of the labor force to raise a family or to take care of an aging parent. So that was a really bad period for advancing inclusive employment. But take a look at 2018 and 2019. Our demographics caught up with us, the lack of birth rates, and suddenly we were in actually the longest labor shortage period we had seen in modern American history, basically a 2-year period where we had more job openings than job seekers. And that, many people on this call will recollect, became a really good time to start introducing the idea of fair chance hiring because businesses were facing a shortage of workers. They were looking for solutions. Moving towards the right, big interruption of COVID, of course, and then we came out of COVID in 2021 and 2022 with a massive shortage of workers. And I'm going through this because it's important to understand just how scarred employers were by the inability to find workers. How bad was it in March of 2022? We had more than 12 million job openings and just around 6 million job seekers. Huge gap. The lesson employers took in part was we've got to be more inclusive about our hiring. That's great and more flexible. But they also learned to do what is being called labor hoarding. And that means even if I should be reducing my workforce because economic conditions have changed, I'm not going to let go of workers unless I absolutely have to, because if I need workers back, I can't find them. It was so hard to hire, I can't risk laying off. And that's given us tremendous stability. Here's where I'm worried about the economy, and this is a weak point that I think we'll know over the next couple of months. Is there is a belief? I don't fully share it. I'm more concerned about the possibility that labor hoarding will end, and that we could see a sudden flurry of layoffs. People may recall back about 4 or 5 weeks ago, I think it was, you had headlines, Amazon laying off tens of thousands of workers, UPS laying off tens of thousands of workers, Verizon the next week laying off 10,000, a record layoff for them. If that's a sign of the times ahead, I think we're going to have a very challenging first quarter. Layoffs seasonally peak in January and February. The final thing, the reason though I am hopeful, even if we see kind of more normalized layoffs, if we flip to the next page, what is encouraging to me is that one of the reasons that we haven't been doing much hiring is because businesses have been paralyzed by policy out of Washington, and in particular tariff policy. There's a measure of how paralyzed businesses are. It's a survey done by the National Federation of Independent Businesses. It's their uncertainty survey. It's the dark blue line in these charts. The higher the blue line, the more uncertain businesses are. And when businesses are uncertain, they're less likely to hire, they're less likely to invest. you can see that it correlated pretty well with the green line. That's the number of times the word tariffs has been mentioned on earnings calls for most public companies. But that relationship is broken. And we think this is a really positive sign for the year ahead and potentially for a rebound in hiring, which has been very slow. We're not seeing it yet, but we think this gives us hope. What we're seeing is the business community is accepting the uncertainty of tariffs. It's no longer freezing them, it's no longer holding them back. And our belief is that this could be what powers the next stage of our economic expansion, pent up demand for workers, pent up demand for investment. And that could be a really good thing. We who care about inclusive hiring should be primed to take advantage of this. Last slide, and then I'd love to hear what else is on your mind, Jason. But if we go to the next slide, this is just a QR code. If people are interested in this, my colleague Josh Wainick and I published an article in Barron's about labor hoarding. Fifth Third Bank, my employer, has made this available. That normally you have to have a subscription. We think this is such an important issue. We're funding the availability of this article to anyone who has the link. The link can be gotten through that QR code.
Awesome. Man, Jeffrey, there's a lot to digest there that you share, and I noticed a number of questions start coming in. So again, audience, if you have questions, don't hesitate to share. We're going to be getting to those, as many as we can, at the latter part of the webinar. And thank you, Jeffrey, for making this resource available to our attendees for the webinar. Really appreciate that. You mentioned a number of things, right? And at the heart of it, there's a sense of uncertainty. But let me just ask you this. When you think about some of the factors that you've mentioned, things like aging population, declining migration, and then you couple that with advancement in AI and automation in the workplace. On top of that, you talk about the bad job numbers, right? How might these trends interact? And what do they collectively mean for the future of the workforce?
It won't surprise you to know I've got two charts for that. So,
Sounds
Kimberly,
good.
I'm sorry if I could ask you to put that back up. The first point is an observation of where we are in the labor market with all these converging trends. And that's the payroll growth, the number of job additions to the economy has really slowed. This goes back to January of 2022. The frenzy to add jobs. We added nearly 900,000 jobs in just 1 month in February of 2022. That settled down, kind of moving from the left to the right on this chart, to net additions to the payrolls of what I would consider what have typically been normal levels for the economy, 150,000, 200,000 jobs. But look at the far right-hand side. Really weak job additions. This wasn't updated. We got 2 new data points today that are one of a month of job losses in October, and then a small gain in November, which isn't on this chart. Something has shifted, and we think the shift is really 2 things. One, that low hiring, but it's also so it means there's lower demand for workers. But there's also a lower supply for workers. This is where the loss of migrant flows is also catching up with us. And it's even if we get hiring coming back, I think we're still going to have a challenge doing large job numbers. So this means not that we have necessarily a recession, but it does mean that we can't count on workforce growth as the big driver of economic growth. And on the next slide, we'll illustrate that. The next slide has data from the Congressional Budget Office, and it basically acknowledges what economists know, that there are really only 2 ways to grow your economy. 1, how fast can you grow your workforce? 2, how fast can you grow the productivity of your workforce? So the green bars here, and this goes back to 1950 data and shows different kind of expansion periods in the U.S. economy. Back in the 50s, really through 2007, a lot of our growth came from workforce growth, and that was both the baby boomers coming of age, really driving the economy forward, and then critically being more inclusive of employers and bringing women into the workforce, and that drove a large portion of the growth. The blue line is the productivity growth because that's the other way. You grow your workforce, but you can also grow your economy by empowering your workforce to be more productive. What the low job numbers mean is that if we want to grow our economy, we have to be much, much more focused on the growth, on the productivity growth, not workforce growth. Given we can't do anything about birth rates 20 and 30 years ago, given that migration policy, we frankly, for all practical manners, we on the call can't do anything about, plus the shift in public preferences in terms of a more closed border. All that means we're much more reliant on productivity. That can be a really good thing for us because one of the ways you grow your productivity is by caring more about your workforce's advancement. And educational attainment is certainly one of the ways you do that. I'll do one last slide on this section, and then I'll turn it back to you, Jason. But we can go one slide forward. Thanks. Just another paper. We at Fifth Third have a collaboration with the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. They have something called the Keenan Institute for Private Enterprise. And with the Keenan Institute, I was the lead author on this particular paper that is linked here. We looked at ways the business community can partner with the nonprofit and the government community to enhance educational attainment. And these are 4 real life examples from around the country. Everything from a company that turned one of their factories into half schoolhouse, half factory, partnering with the local school district to raise high school diploma rates, high school completion rates, to a program in Spartanburg, South Carolina, where they realized many of their citizens in Spartanburg County have college credits but never got the degree, and getting those folks to come back in for job-ready degrees or in-demand jobs. It's been a tremendously promising program. All of this is going to be the wave of the future, and we have to make sure that the justice-involved population is part of this as well.
Awesome. Again, thank you for all of these resources that you share. Jeffrey, I want to kind of lean in on something that you mentioned. You talked about productivity and just the importance of growing productivity in particular, because the reality is to grow the labor force, it requires something that we really don't necessarily have, which is time, right? That being said, when you think about automation and AI, there's a lot of talk around its role in productivity. Very, very curious to hear your thoughts. What role will automation, AI, and technological changes play in redefining the kind of job availability over the next decade?
So we are. It's got to be a big portion, and the business community typically thinks of productivity growth as driven by automation. There's great hope for AI. And there's very rapid adoption of AI, even relative to, say, the internet, because we already have platforms, whether through our cell phones or through workstations or laptops or whatever employers are using. It's really easy to disseminate AI to individuals. What isn't so clear is how quickly AI will be adopted in a real sense. So, people are using it, but are they using it in ways that are truly enhancing productivity? And I think the real answer is it depends. There's certain rote tasks that AI is really good at. But I have to say, as someone, and maybe I'm old-fashioned, my early career skill that really advanced me was adopting technology, and I knew how to use a spreadsheet, Lotus 123, and word processing, WordPerfect, both at the same time. I had that math, and at a certain period in time, that gave me an edge. So I recognize I don't have the edge that newer entrants to the workforce have with newer technologies. But it does bother me that AI is being tossed out casually as a cure-all for everything. I think when you get down to it, it it bothers me that AI answers so many basic questions inaccurately,
Mm,
and calling those things hallucinations is a brilliant marketing tactic, but it really is a way of masking over inaccuracies.
mm,
And it comes up, it makes up citations, it makes up quotes. So it's really tricky to use, but I think it's not going away.
no.
I think we are ahead of ourselves in our expectations. There's a great rule called Amaro's Law, which says with transformational new technologies, um, we tend to overestimate the near term impact and underestimate the long term impact. I
Mm,
think we are overestimating the near term impact of AI, but AI is just a subset. I'm going to go back to a chart. I want to show you one chart on this, Kimberly, if you could. Um, this is a concept called robotic density, and it's a measure of it's basically the number of robots per 10,000 manufacturing workers. And the U.S. you can see is really pretty lackluster of this for a uh, very developed, technologically sophisticated economy. We're actually not very good at adopting, or we're well behind at adopting automation. I think some of this was the massive flow of migrant labor. You didn't have to adopt labor saving technologies because you had this apparently, or appeared to be at the time, unending flow of cheap workers. And that is over with. So there's something economists call the Lewis turning point. Sir Arthur Lewis was the recipient of the 1979 Nobel Prize in Economics. Interestingly, he was the only black man to win the Nobel Prize in Economics. He was from St. Lucia, and he focused on developing countries. And he observed that there's a sea change that goes on in economies and in workforce when you run out of cheap agricultural workers. As he first applied this to Bangladesh. And the way most developing economies really start their growth path or accelerate their growth path is getting people to move from the agricultural sector into the cities to manufacturing and other more productive sectors of the economy. But at some point, you run out of those cheap, low skilled workers, and you have to do things differently. And that's when you focus on automating and lifting the skills of your workforce. This is meant to be a measure for developing economies, but I believe you can apply this. It's analogous to where we are in the United States, because, yeah, we didn't have a mass flow of workers coming off of the farms. That was back in the 40s and 50s. But what we did have is this mass flow of migrant laborers. And now that's over. The business community is going to shift to automation and productivity enhancement. And we who care about workforce development have to be ready for this. If you take a look on the left-hand side, the countries that are really doing well in this are countries with really low birth rates. Korea, Singapore, China, Germany, Japan are all ahead of us. So I think what you're going to see is the business community adopting. We're talking about AI, but I think they're going to be adopting a lot of other productivity enhancements and technology driven. How do we should we be ready for this? Well, I've been talking to the business community about how they're using AI. I think the best response was a friend of mine who runs a consulting firm with 60 people, and he said AI isn't going to replace your job. People who know how to use AI are going to replace your job. And I think
mm,
that's something that we in workforce development have to keep in mind.
mm. You know, Jeffrey, on that same note, you mentioned a number of factors, right, that obviously clearly indicate that things are shifting, things are changing. You had, you made a statement. You said we need to be ready in the workforce, right? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. So let's zero in now on the justice impacted job
Yeah.
seekers, right? When we think about this particular solution to the labor force, what opportunities do you think will be created? What would you say are the greatest opportunity for justice impacted job
Sure.
seekers?
So I think the low-hanging fruit is replacement for migrant workers
Mm,
because we got used to the business community isn't going to pivot to technology on a dime. In the meantime, they're looking to replace the loss of flows of workers that they have. And that's going to be a great opportunity. But that is not felt equally across the country. So that will matter to some of the listeners on this call, but not to all of them. Kimberly, if you could switch to the next slide, I'll show you some interesting data that we've come across. This is the percentage of workforce that is undocumented labor by state. So if you're a workforce development organization on the call today from New Hampshire, this isn't very relevant to you, right? Because 1% of the New Hampshire workforce is undocumented. On the other hand, if you're in California, 12% of the California workforce is undocumented. There's a huge gap. How do you, even if many of those undocumented stay and we don't see deportations, the inflow is gone. So this is something that really needs to be on the radar screen, I think, for justice impacted individuals. Same with Texas, Nevada, Seattle, Washington State, all very, very intense here, but it's across the country to some degree or another. Those blank spots, Montana, North Dakota, and so forth, doesn't mean they don't have undocumented workers, just means we don't have the data for those. Just as it impacts different geographies, it also impacts different industries. If you turn to the next slide, you'll see the intensity of this by industry. So construction is going to have a major problem in the United States. 13.7% of the construction workforce is undocumented. A lot of this is in subcontractors. We're hearing anecdotally about job sites that are abandoned or can't move forward because the subcontractors don't show up. These are going to be great opportunities in these fields for justice impacted individuals. And I also believe very strongly that these are, even though some areas here, like laborer jobs, you're going to see rising wages because of the shortage of workers created by the enforcement of migration policy. Again, not saying the migration policy is good or bad, just observing when you cut off the flow of workers, it tends to raise wages. And things like construction and agriculture and hospitality, which are all the three leaders in this, don't lend themselves that well to automation, right? You just we're doing some things in construction. We've done a lot over the decades in agriculture, but it's pretty hard to replace a hotel desk clerk. You can do, say, in hospitality, you can do things like change your business model. So go from a full serve restaurant to a counter serve restaurant and reduce the labor. But there's still going to be a great need for workers here. So that's number one. The immediate opportunity, the low hanging fruit is look to where we've lost migrant inflows. That's going to be a great area. And then just realizing that the business community is going to long term need more trained workers, more educated workers. So educational initiatives that are tied to job needs are going to be really important. Um, uh, uh, Knowledge of technology is really important. Knowledge in these particular fields, construction, agriculture, hospitality, is going to be really important. I think it's taking time. It's been held up by the uncertainty and that low hiring rate. But within the next 2 years, I think this is all going to shake loose. We're going to go back to a kind of normal hiring environment where we need workers. There's big gaps that are going to need to be filled, and it's a great opportunity for justice impacted workers.
Thank you, Jeffrey. So I'm hearing here that there is a place-based way to look at the impact, but then also there's also the certain industries that are more impacted than some. By the way, thank you again for sharing even these numbers. We'll be sharing this deck with our audience. A number of our folks, as you know, are leading reentry workforce programs. And on that note, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Jeffrey. Um, we talk about the shift in the environment and kind of the opportunity that's created currently for justice impacted job seekers. But people like practitioners like myself and other folks in the field, what type of adjustments should reentry workforce programs be making and be thinking about when it comes down to the opportunities that are being created?
Well, I think these are things that are not necessarily changed by the environment, but are always best practices. I love some of you on the call are familiar with Dan Meyer. He's the CEO and founder of Nehemiah Industries. If you're not familiar with Nehemiah, I'd urge you to look up the Harvard Business School case study. It's the first case study by a major university done of a second chance, fair chance employer. Dan is an incredible pioneer, just an incredible human being as well. I'm proud to call him a friend. He has, of his roughly 225 workers, 175 are justice impacted. And he has the people running one of his plants justice impacted. So it's not just entry level job. Everyone has the opportunity, and it's been a great model. And he shared that model with other companies and other industries. For example, Kroger Stores, one of the largest employers in the United States, started a fair chance hiring program after visiting Dan's facility. But Dan said, with reference to nonprofits in the space and government entities in this space, he said, you have your clients, meaning the people we serve, but you also have your customers, and those are the employers. And so I think it's really important to recognize that it's a more complex web of stakeholders. I know many people on this call already get that and do a great job with it, but you can never say it often enough. The business owner, the business decision maker, is also a customer of yours, and that's pretty critical. And you want to treat that customer relationship with great care. So a lot of that means aligning with understanding what the business owner is looking for. And the business owner is typically not looking to solve societal problems. They'll write a check to a charity that they believe in, but they're only going to hire people who add value to their enterprise. And so it's really important to lead with that value add and deliver on it. Meaning, if a business owner wants a long-term employee, long-term engaged employee, your your measures of success shouldn't be placement, should be longevity. And that's something that I encourage business owners to partner with nonprofits and government authorities, but also make sure you're aligned on the same goals. And it's a two-way street. The business owner then has an obligation to either help with funding or political support, have a true partnership in these areas. And some businesses aren't up for it. There's no doubt about that. Some businesses have approached this with for lack of a better word, an exploitative lens. There's no reason to work with people like that. But create true customer relationships is going to be really important. But that also means doing it the right way. And look, being in social service nonprofits or government agencies is really hard work, and you spend a tremendous amount of time just patching problems and not actually solving problems. The partnership with businesses has to be approached with, how are we going to solve this problem? Which means you don't want just a placement, you want someone who's going to work out. And I think it's important to understand that you have to educate your customer, the business owner, about how to do this right. And I hope I'm not offending anyone on the call, but I can't tell you how many times I've been at a gathering and heard someone with a nonprofit that serves this community and say, just give it a try. I've heard several times, we'll be the first employee in and the last employee to leave in the day. That is true only if you follow the right model, if you've been selective in your hiring and supportive in your approach. It is not true if you just do this randomly. And so it really sets up for a lot of businesses that I've talked to have tried fair chance hiring, but they tried it in the sense of we'll give someone a whirl, and that is not a good guarantee of success. We really have to follow best practices here for setting this up right from the get-go, and it's important not to overpromise and underdeliver.
Awesome, Jeffrey. I'm very encouraged to hear you share what you shared. And the reason is because in our employer engagement training, one of the things that we emphasize is that the training and the preparation for the participant, you're actually getting ready to provide the employer with their most valuable asset, right? And if you're doing that with a level of faithfulness, then that means that they should deliver on a job, which means that there should be some reciprocity. But if the organization shortchange that process, then it just does not work for anyone. So I'm encouraged to hear you reinforce that. Um, I'm excited to see a number of questions coming in. And Jeffrey, we're going to transition now to some Q&A. But before we do, I'm going to ask you, with just 30 seconds, have you seen any model outside of the US that you've seen that's worth highlighting? And again, 30 seconds, and then we jump into some questions. We have 13 questions
Oh,
so far. We're not
yeah.
going to get through everything, but we're going to try to do our best.
So I think it's there's something really interesting going on in Great Britain right now. The Fair Chance Alliance is working on a badging system where employers get similar to the LEED system for energy efficient buildings. You get a badge of being public about being a fair chance employer. You get a higher level badge, so it's like silver, gold, platinum. I forget the actual things. That's interesting because it makes it's an interesting incentive for CEOs. I used to joke that after you've made your first $20 million in a year, the thrill is
Mhm,
gone. I have not yet had that thrill, of course, but
mhm,
many CEOs have, and what motivates them is status. And offering a status symbol like that, I think, is really interesting. And then it'll be no surprise, Norway has a really interesting cultural approach to
mhm,
reentry, and they have various reentry promises. But what I love is there's a saying in Norway that you go to court to be punished, you go to prison to learn how to be a good neighbor. And
mhm.
if we
Wow.
approached our justice system through that lens, I think we'd have a much more successful reentry and much more successful society.
Mm. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jeffrey. Now, again, we have a ton of questions, so I'm just going to jump in. The first one is actually from Patricia Padilla. Patricia, we will share the slides after kind of seeing the content. I think it makes sense to share it with the audience. So we'll go ahead and jump down to the next question from Jim Eccles. And this is a question. Do you feel that employment liability, oh, sorry, can you address the issue of change management from the perspective of organization culture and leadership?
So culture has to be right for this to work.
Mm,
And I always say there are three pieces to making this work. Number one has to start at the top. The C-suite, the ownership, has to make clear that this is a priority, has to hold people accountable, and has to have consequences if the team isn't delivering. Number two, you need to train people on how to do this right. So
mm,
at the employer level. So, say JFF has a great program. I work with the Corporate Coalition of Chicago. They have a great training program. So, all of the people, and there are others out there, um, all Envoy is starting something. All of the people who um, need to deal with this day to day, the HR people, the legal people, people who might be responsible for onboarding, all have to know what they're doing. How do you
mm,
read a background? That kind of thing. How do you properly advertise for a job? But then at the base level, you need the right culture. And
Mm,
I'll tell you, for example, Shaw Industries, one of the largest carpet and flooring manufacturers in the world. They have over 20,000 employees based in Georgia. They went through all of this. They got buy-in from the C-suite. Their leadership, their talent leadership, had heard me speak. They sent their implementers to training by then Dave's Killer Bread Foundation, now the JFF program. But then they needed that base of how do you change culture?
yeah.
And they created a advisory council, which included supervisors from the factory floor, people in marketing, PR, legal, broaden, and they get together. They actually use my book. They'll assign a chapter on my book. I'm told you can do this without my book, but it sure doesn't hurt. Um, and they talk about it. The other thing I'm encouraging businesses, say if there's Defy Ventures or some other opportunity, the Texas Prison Entrepreneurship Program or Prison Ministries, if there's chances for particularly young future leaders in the business world to have interaction with justice impacted community, I think that's a really healthy thing. It helps humanize and reduce some of the stigma. So that's something. Fifth Third, my employer, is buying Comerica Bank. Comerica apparently has been sending people in California to Defy Ventures events in prisons. I'm thrilled to hear that. I'm trying to bring that more broadly into other states as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeffrey. So John Afonso have a question here regarding risk perception, right? Here's a question. Do you feel that employment liability insurance plays a large role in taking a chance on someone who has a criminal record, or is it just fear or hiring those with a record?
The answer is yes. It's really both. It's the reality is that there's very little negligent hiring liability lawsuits that win, that go on and that win. The vast majority of them, the folks at Envoy Consulting have done a good job in kind of sifting through some of the legal cases. The vast majority are motor vehicle violations, DUI and crashes and things like that. Um, that being said, the fact that it doesn't happen often is not really a very convincing counter argument to a business, to an employer. Houses hardly ever catch on fire, but I have fire insurance on my house. How do I protect myself if I'm a business owner against, maybe it's a slim chance, but it's any chance of a negligent hiring liability? And that is required. So I think it's people assume they can't get past this, and it's an education process, tackling it head on and just saying, yeah, if you have a process for analysis, show you are sensitive to this needs and document your process, you have a very high level of protection. And it brings it down to a very, the type of risk level that businesses accept day in and day out.
Mm,
But it's absolutely an issue.
got it. Thank you. So Amina asks us questions regarding website or web platform that have a job opportunity, and look like there's an interest in Detroit here. Jeffrey, I know you travel the country, but I understand if you don't have a contextual understanding of Detroit in particular. But I guess the question is what platform, I guess, would be appropriate to find jobs? And this person's asking specifically in terms of information technology, but I'll just even broaden it to see if you know of any platforms.
I always I haven't followed it very closely, but I've always been interested in the Honest Jobs platform,
Mm,
honestjobs.com, which, an employer who's advertising a job there, is determined to give fair chance. Indeed.com has some resources as well. I always encourage employers to make sure, if you are truly open to giving someone a fair chance, that should be part of your job posting as well, and that's something that you will hopefully see more of going forward.
got it. I have another question here from Malia. Given a shift towards AI in the marketplace, do you see an opportunity to have system involved job seekers gain mastery in the field, particularly for white collar jobs?
So I think so. I understand this is not my area of expertise. I do understand that Google has an AI certification that I believe is even free. So
Mm.
that might be interesting. You know, if there's folks like the Last Mile that have done great jobs on focusing on technology education. So I'd be curious on what they're doing in this regard. Um, do realize that there's a lot of hype also in AI, and that you
Mm.
have to be really careful about how you use it. Um, so
Got it.
so that's so you know I'm cautious about it. I think there's a little bit more hype out there. You know, when you're hearing layoffs due to AI, I strongly suspect it's not actually layoffs due to AI. It's layoffs due to slowing business conditions. But if you're a CEO, it sounds so much better to say it's AI, not my business is slowing. And I think that'll be proved out over the next year or two.
Awesome. Jeffrey, I have a question here from an anonymous attendee. Do you think the need for college degrees will be less or more uh, important to obtain a job in the next few years?
So the need for skills and education are more important than ever and will continue to be. Whether that's delivered through a college or other platform, I think is still up in the air. And I think that, I'm a great fan of college educations. College degrees for the justice impacted community seem to have extra value because employers seem to take that as a sign of rehabilitation. So
Hmm.
for the justice impacted community, perhaps it's important not just for the skills attainment, but also for the proof of rehabilitation. I earned a degree. I'm a different person. So I think it tends to be more important for the population we talk about so much. But I think what you're going to see is more alternatives.
Hmm.
Or things like community colleges are really stepping up and have done a great job in partnering with the business community and with the industries to get relevant training. One thing I'm hoping for is that the administration, maybe when they get past their focus on foreign affairs and tariffs and maybe past what the election and is I think the administration is not unfriendly to a lot of issues like
Hmm.
this. There's been some talk of a workforce Pell, a Pell Grant that doesn't require a traditional degree at completion. I think that or a degree granting program, those kind of things could be really interesting in boosting workforce skills. I hope we get there. I was at the White House for two events in the first Trump administration. I'm convinced the president actually is friendly to this, but has been very, distracted by other things. I hope we get back to that focus because whether you like him or not, the president has the ear of a large number of business owners and business decision makers, particularly small business owners and small business decision makers. And if he can come back to being a champion for second chances, I think that would be very healthy for this whole movement.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey. I think we have time for probably two or three more questions. I want to just share with the audience. Before you go, there's going to be a link that's going to pop up with a survey. We want to get your feedback on the session, so please do share your thoughts. Let me get back to this question here. This one by an anonymous attendee, and it's a question that I'm sure a lot of persons who are attending have. You talked a little bit about the migrant worker, right? But typically, oftentimes, those roles are not all, but many of those are issues around whether the wage is livable. So the question that this attendee has is, how can we address how to create a sustainable living wage for justice impacted individuals, especially given that most of the jobs that are opening up were occupied by migrant workers.
I think, and again, I'm very look. As I mentioned, my grandparents were immigrants. My mother's a war
Mm.
refugee. So this is just trying to be observant of the facts. I believe the flow of migrant workers depressed wages in the United States,
Mm.
and that at particularly at entry level, low skill, low educational attainment jobs, that's kind of first rung in the ladder. I think definitely, there's academic evidence at that end of the wage scale. It was depressed by migrant workers. So my hope is some of this will be resolved. One of there's lots of challenges of ending the migrant worker inflow, but I think there's an opportunity for higher wages for native-born and foreign-born legally authorized workers to be here. But ultimately, the economics are that to get a higher wage, you have to be more productive. If all I can deliver in terms of goods and services is worth $20 an hour, I can't get paid probably more than $15 an hour. So the cost of
Mm,
benefits, because of attrition, turnover kind of costs that get embedded, because it's not every employee works out, and so you have to have an allowance for that. So ultimately, we have to upskill our workers. I think what has been missing in the upskilling space is the business community being involved, and they can no
yeah.
longer afford not to be involved. I think there's a, I don't want to overstate this, but I do think that there's a golden age coming where this Lewis turning point I mentioned is going to happen in the United States, and we all have to be much more focused on giving people higher levels of skills. Higher levels of skills allow them to demand higher wages and get to that livable wage point.
Well, listen, Jeffrey, as we come to the close of the session, last minute, curious to hear if you have any golden advice for the folks that are attending. We do have many practitioners that are on the call, but then there's also employers as well. So feel free to share on both sides or pick any section that you're
So,
interested
so to the employers on the call, I'm hoping you've already found this works, but it does. The
in.
best pathway to getting a loyal, engaged worker is to hire someone who wants to prove they're worth more than their worst mistake and
Mhm.
given the platform. And it's also, I have yet to meet a second chance employer who doesn't look back and say, yeah, this was a business decision, but it's been deeply gratifying on a
Mm.
personal and human level.
Awesome. Well, listen, that is kind of where we're ending it today. Jeffrey, thank you so much for your time. Continue to be excited about your partnership in this work. I also want to extend my gratitude for everyone who attended. As I had mentioned before, please do pay attention to your screen. You'll be getting a pop-up on your screen. Please do hit that button and respond and tell us how you think the session went. We also consider your feedback for future sessions, so please do share your thoughts with us. I also want to thank Kimberly and Michael for working behind the scene. Really grateful for all the work that you put in to make this possible. Jeffrey, I'm not sure if you have any last words.
The only thing is, if people want to follow my work in this area, I don't post as much as I used to, but please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn or send me a LinkedIn invitation. I'm the spelling of my name is on the upper right of your screen. I'm the only Jeffrey Korzenik on the planet. So if you can spell my name, you can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd welcome the connection. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. And I would say please go out and get the Untapped Talent. It's a great book. I've read it personally, and it was very helpful in especially helping to hear the business case from the lens of an economist who is engaging with a lot of business. So thanks again, Jeffrey, and thanks again to our attendees. We're really grateful for you taking the time to be with us. Take care. We will be sending out the slides, by the way, so excited to share that with you as well. Thanks again, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care.